Good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to see you for today's Insight session. I'm Simone Hugo-Lake and I'm going to be facilitating over the next hour. We've got a really great panel of speakers for you today who are going to be sharing their reflections on the topic of how professional registration can empower and enable probation qualified staff. So our panel will bring a really great expertise from the worlds of probation practice, probation leadership, academia, and from probation registration in other jurisdictions. Many of them contributed to the Probation Journal special issue on professional registration, which was in June of this year, and several of the panel are also members of HMPPS's independent probation professional registration panel that oversees the operation of the HMPPS professional register. So you're going to be able to put questions to them following their presentations. We're keen that it's an interactive event today. Just before I go to introduce the panel, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping that you can see on the slide there as well. So could everybody please just keep their mics turned off during the presentations, but you're very welcome to leave your camera on if you wish to. The event is going to be recorded and it will be available for playback on the Insights 25 YouTube channel after the festival. It's worth noting that these recordings can be used for marketing purposes, so please bear that in mind as you choose whether or not to have your camera on. And do please let us know if you don't want your name to be shown. You can contact us via the professional registration team email address, which will be added to the chat during the session. The chat function is on during the session, so you're welcome to pop anything that you wish in the sort of chat function, which includes kind of questions, but we won't be picking up those questions until the panel have finished speaking. So just to make sure that we can focus on the presentations from our speakers, we'll pick up the questions after the session, but we'll have about 25 minutes to take questions, keen for them to share their perspectives, but also keen to hear from you. So we'll make sure we leave time for any questions. If there are lots of questions, we'll get through as many as possible on the live QA, but we will there will be a follow-up with written answers to questions after the event. If there's too many to get through, we'll just see how it goes with questions to the panel. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce the panel now. So first of all, we have Sonia Flynn CBE, and Sonia is Deputy Director at HMPPS and a Registered Probation Officer. Sonia leads the development of professional registration in England and Wales, and she's been a tireless advocate for professionalisation of probation throughout her career. Sonia's career began in 1988 as a probation officer and latterly as the first Chief Probation Officer for England and Wales. She oversaw national operations and led the National Security Division. Sonia was awarded the CBE in 2021 for her leadership during national crisis. So we're delighted to have Sonia with us today. Next up, we have Dr. Jake Phillips, and Jake is an Associate Professor at the University of Cambridge and Director of the MST Applied Criminology, Penology and Management. Jake's research focuses on probation culture, emotional labour and practitioner well-being. Jake is also the editor of the Probation Journal, co-chair of the European Society of Criminology's Working Group on Community Sanctions, respected voice on advisory panels, including HMI Probation's Expert Advisory Group. So delighted we've got Jake with us today too. Then we have Helen Schofield. Helen's Chief Executive of the Probation Institute. Helen's background is in probation, including probation trade union, NAPO, in police training, and as a trustee in the voluntary sector. The Probation Institute offers professional development through online events, publications, and opportunities for professional discussions. So great to have them represented here today too. Then we have Catherine Maguire, who's interim co-director at the Northern Ireland Social Care Council, so is well placed to share experiences from other jurisdictions as they regulate probation officers in Northern Ireland. Catherine's a registered social worker, having worked in the justice sector and in education and training as a practice teacher and lecturer in social work. And Catherine co-leads on regulation and standards for Northern Ireland Social Care Council, including fitness to practice, setting standards of conduct and practice, and workforce development. We're also delighted that we're going to hear some reflections from Kyle Hart. Kyle is a registered probation officer. He's a senior probation officer and a researcher, and he brings a really strong blend of academic and operational insight to the panel. So currently studying for an MA in criminal justice leadership, and Kyle is also a recipient of the Sir Graham Smith Research Award. So no further ado, I shall hand over to the panel. So Sonia, great to hear your reflections, please.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you for that lovely introduction as well. As you referenced in my introduction, I have been around the service a long time, so I can actually remember when probation was subject to professional external regulation, but you do have to go back a long time for that, into the 1990s. And I have been a long advocate of external regulation being reinstated for reasons that I'll draw out in my presentation. But ultimately, it is about enhancing, enabling and supporting everyone in the work that we do, and that to be formally recognised. So we are starting, as I say, from a kind of zero base in terms of reinstating professional registration. And it was actually in 2023 that in England and Wales, we saw the introduction of the Probation Professional Register. And that's really when we started to ask all those that we employ to provide the evidence of their professional qualification, and that's to be recorded on our HR systems. But this is more than just a list, and it was in 2024 that the policy framework for mandatory registration was introduced with our 6 professional standards, the standards that we should stand by and that should guide our practice regardless of grade. And once the policy document was released, we were able then to introduce the designation of Registered Probation Officer, PSO, which is now reflected on our ID badges, and some of you choose as well to wear the little pin badge that's noted on the screen. And because we haven't got an external regulator yet, we introduced the professional registration panel in a way to act as a critical friend to us, and many of those who are on the call today are members of that panel, and we value their input so much. So by 2025, I can confirm that 8,000 of our employees are now registered. We are asking everyone to complete their first review this year. We have an ambition to ensure that we expand registration, both to accept people who want to voluntarily join the register. So it's not a requirement of their role that they have the probation qualification, but if you would like to join and you have the qualification and you're employed by HMPPS, you can now. And we're working with colleagues in L&D towards PSO mandatory registration, with the aim to bring PSOs on in September next year. And we want to ensure that the internal register feels dynamic and real. And we consider, as the final bullet points there says, to influence and ensure that external regulation is something which is considered in terms of the future development of the service. So I said that in 24 we released 6 professional standards, and you can see those there on that little cheese graph. Those standards, the 6, were shaped by wide-ranging consultation with staff and with people on probation. I think they actually go to the core of what we do, promoting our work as being person-centred and structured by continued professional development. And clearly if you look at any professional registration, that ability to demonstrate that you're keeping your skills and knowledge up to date beyond your kind of foundation qualification is also an important cornerstone of that professional identity. Next slide. So, as I've said, 99.4% of staff required to register have provided their certificates. So we now have a register for the first time in a long time. The registered probation officer designation has been released, and I know because people tell me it's been worn with pride. And actually, one of the most important sets of negotiations we had before we introduced the policy was talk to external stakeholders, and people told us outside of the service they wanted something that for them told them that this was a registered probation officer. So those ID badges, as I say, were asked for and they've now been distributed. I said that CPD was an important component of registration and for renewal. So it's been really welcome to see a real step up this year in the amount of officers who've now completed up the siege training and safeguarding training. And we've also ensured that our agency staff who have the same opportunity both to register and ensure that they have training. And we've recently received some really nice feedback from our contractors who deliver the agency staff to say they've noticed a change actually in agency staff completing training. We want professional registration. We want to learn from those jurisdictions that have had registration for significantly longer, how we can make it meaningful and empowering. Shouldn't just be a list, it's about identity. It should also inform the shape and the future of the service in terms of the way those standards are applied and support the future development of CPD, making time for people to have that reflective piece, time to actually reflect on what they're doing, and at the same time building a sense of both confidence and competence and building public trust and recognition in terms of what the service actually does. So I hope that leaves you in absolutely no doubt about my commitment to what we're doing and where I can see its benefits both for now and in the future. So on that note, I'm going to close and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jake Phillips to give his reflections on professional registration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thanks for inviting me to come along today, and thanks to those of you who come along to listen. So I'm not going to use slides. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about, I guess I'm going to talk from a couple of perspectives. First of all, I'm going to speak as a member of the independent panel that Sonia mentioned. And so I've seen kind of the process play out a little bit, the process of implementing the professional register. I'm also going to speak from the perspective of somebody who's done research on inspection in the world of probation. And I think there's an overlap between inspection and the professional register in that they are both forms of regulation. And regulation serves, I guess, various purposes. So firstly, regulation is there to hold organisations and practitioners to account. But regulation is also about steering the organisation and steering practitioners so that they work more effectively and so that delivery improves and so on. So it's kind of got dual purpose. And what I did in the research that I did on inspection was I looked at people's experiences of that particular form of regulation through the lens of procedural justice. And I'm going to try and do that today, but looking at professional registration instead of inspection. And the reason I think that's important is because if people experience the process of regulation as procedurally just, so if they experienced the professional register as procedurally just, then they are more likely to engage in what's being asked of them. They're more likely to see it as a legitimate exercise. They're much more likely to comply with the demands that are being placed on them in order to become and stay registered. So if the aim of the registration, as Sonia says, is to empower, to raise the status of probation in the eyes of the public and also in the eyes of government and the criminal justice system, then it's really important that it is experienced as a procedurally just activity. So I think what I've got to say is a bit of a reflection on how the implementation of the register has kind of happened, or what's happened so far in the implementation, and whether it's adhered to some of those principles of procedural justice. And I think I also have a bit of a challenge to the professional register team, lots of whom are here today, to think about some of this stuff going forward. So procedural justice and legitimacy aren't static things, they are negotiated on an ongoing basis. So I think for the register to fulfill that potential around empowering practitioners, contribute to that greater sense of professionalism in the eyes of practitioners and the general public, it needs to be seen as legitimate, and that legitimacy needs to be constantly negotiated. So procedural justice, I'm just going to go through those kind of 4 pillars of procedural justice that lots of you will already have come across before, I'm sure. So first of all, neutrality. This is about making unbiased decisions that are applied consistently and with transparency. So the decisions there, the professional, the elements of being a probation professional that Sonia just talked about there, I think are a really good example of how the register is being implemented in a neutral way. There's a principle that I think underpins what's happened so far, that everybody needs to be held to the same standards. Everybody needs to aspire to the same levels of kind of practice and have the same values underpinning what they're doing. There's probably some things to think about here around decisions which are made about deregistration for when people are no longer deemed able to be on the register. And I think that there's always a question around neutrality when the register remains internal. And I know Sonia talked about there are considerations around how and whether the register becomes external. I think the more external to HMPPS the register is, the more neutral it will be perceived by people who are being regulated. Respect is the next pillar of procedural justice. I think this is a bit less relevant here, partly because in the kind of procedural justice literature, this is often kind of particularly pertinent to that interpersonal interaction between a regulator and a regulatee. So that might be a police officer and a member of the public, but for probation practitioners, it's the register and them. It's that interaction through which procedural justice is experienced and assessed by the person who's being regulated. But still, the process needs to be respectful. And I think there's a risk that the process can be experienced as onerous, and that might be experienced as disrespectful by a practitioner who perhaps feels overworked, feels like they're being pulled in all kinds of different places. So there's something to be careful about going forward, that the register balances the demands that are being made of practitioners with the realities of their work and so on. I'll just speak for 1 more minute if that's okay. So the third one is trustworthiness. So this is about being perceived to have trustworthy motives. And I think this is really important. I think it's probably one of the most important. So why is the register being implemented? And I think events such as this are really important for kind of creating that narrative, because I think there's a risk that the register is perceived by practitioners to be something that's used to bash them around the head with, chuck them under the bus with when things go wrong. And if that perception changes, then that's going to quickly undermine the register. And then finally, just really quickly on voice. So voice is really important. Giving people voice is letting people have a say in the decisions made about them. And from what I've seen and what Sonia's just mentioned, there has been real efforts to include the voices of practitioners in the process. And there is some research, I think, about to start on people's experiences of becoming registered, renewing registration. But this is important. It's important that this kind of carries on going forward. Is it going to be possible for practitioners to be involved in a meaningful but not burdensome way in decisions made about registration or deregistration? There's another risk here around the register becoming a tick box exercise, and giving people a voice in the process is a good way of avoiding that. Not quite sure how, maybe through kind of reflective supervision. So there are some very brief thoughts really about how I think it's important, number one, that the register adheres to those principles of procedural justice. I think on the whole, it has done that, but there are some risks going forward, and actually keeping an eye on that procedural justice element of things will help it avoid some of those risks that I've highlighted going forward. Sorry for running slightly over, but hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to hand over to Helen now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jake. That's great. I'm Helen Schofield, Chief Executive of the Probation Institute. I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the perspective of the Probation Institute in relation to the regulatory process. Some of you will know that professional registration, regulation and professionalisation have been a passion for the Probation Institute since its inception in 2014. So the first thing to say is it's great to see the progress. We are also members of the registration panel. It's great to see the progress, particularly around the professional identity, whether or not you wear the badge or not. I think to be a registered probation officer, it is a great thing now. So on this slide, I just want to look at the great company that the Probation Service is in terms of regulated professions. This is not an exclusive list of regulated professions, but you will recognise that these are what you might call professions allied to probation or allied to justice. So they're in care, they're in health, and they're in justice. All of these organisations have an independent regulatory process established by legislation. And if you look at the dates, you can see how long these have been in place. All of these operate in a sustainable way, but they don't operate without challenges. If you follow any of these online, you can sometimes see challenges around deregistration, kind of thing that Jake was mentioning. But they work through that, and you will be, Probation is in excellent company, I think, making this big step. So if we can have a look at the next slide. It's useful just to stand back, isn't it, I think, and say, what's the point of all of this? Why are we doing this? Purpose of professional registration. The top bullet point has to be, the primary purpose has to be about protecting the public from harm by exercising scrutiny of practice overall. When I say practice, I mean, in a sense, the whole practice, and thereby securing the confidence of the profession and of the public. So we do that by setting standards of conduct and accreditation for the profession itself, for managers and for leaders and for the whole organisation. And I want to just pause here and say that wonderful as it is to have standards and registration and the regulatory process emerging so well for practitioners, we think in probation that it's really important that this assurance and standards applies to the employer also. I think in any deregistration process, you don't want an individual practitioner to be able to say, well, I would have, but my organisation wasn't able to support me in achieving the aims that you are now challenging me for not meeting. We'll hear a little bit more from the Northern Ireland Social Care Council shortly, and perhaps a little bit about the employer standards work that is in place there. So consistency is key. What's really important also is that the profession and the public knows that it's up to date. And in justice, this is such a critical issue, isn't it? Because things change so quickly. And then finally, I think the purpose is about managing the loss of authority, if it has to happen, in a manner that is credible and effective. So if we look at the next slide, this is the second slide. This slide is structured partly in italics and partly not in italics. I hope you can see that. The parts of it that are in italics are the requirements of the professional registration process that are in place. So the register itself, the license to practice, the standards, qualifications, of course, at PQIT, but also the level 3 award, and the new apprenticeship is coming for level 3. Also, I'm very pleased to see the internal review of participant experience is in progress now, so hopefully we'll have some results from that internal review. Not in italics, of course, at the bottom, and really, really important are two more stages really that need to be brought along as quickly as possible, I think. One of those is to really establish a continuous professional development system that is properly recorded and quantified, but is more than that, but is also inspiring, engaging, interesting, where people feel that they're not just doing a bit of learning, more learning because you have to do it for the organisation's requirements, but also that is opening up new areas, looking at research that, as I say, is inspiring for people, so that the wanting to learn sits alongside the registration process. And the final bit for the Probation Institute for me is that in time this must become an independent regulatory body. I say that partly because none of the systems that are in place for scrutiny of the Probation Service are truly independent. Even HMIP is within the system. So an independent regulatory body would be established by legislation, which is not currently the case, of course, and it will move away from HMPPS, and it will establish itself with an independent process for registration, continuous professional development, complaints, and deregistration. And all of that is still subject to some discussion with government. It's still subject to a wider consultation process, I think. And of course, it's also subject to funding, because to set up an independent regulatory process is a more expensive process than setting up an internal panel within probation. But for the Probation Institute, those two bullet points at the end are really the next steps and the key to making this a wholly professional regulatory process. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today. So as I was introduced at the beginning, I'm Catherine McGuire from the Social Care Council in Northern Ireland. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organisation and our regulatory approach as well. And it occurs to me as I kind of talk through this to some extent is my professional history as well, because I was working as a probation officer in Northern Ireland when professional regulation of social work was introduced in 2005. So the Social Care Council, we're the regulator for social work education and training, and for the social work and social care workforce in Northern Ireland. And Helen, you talked about the purpose of regulation, which sits very well with our purpose, which is to protect the public, maintain confidence in the profession, and uphold professional standards. Social work regulation is a devolved matter, so unlike other regulators where there are whole UK regulation, there are separate ones in each country. We were established in 2001 by an act of the Northern Ireland Parliament or Assembly, and our status is as a non-departmental public body, and our sponsor department in Northern Ireland is Health. Our core responsibilities haven't changed over the years in terms of regulation, but how we do them has changed many times over the years in terms of changing our approach, but also taking on some additional responsibilities. The Professional Standards Authority, when they set out the principles for right touch regulation, one of the principles they identify is agility. So it's really important for us as a regulator to look forward, to adopt and to anticipate change, and we've done that at numerous points over the last 24 years. One of those really important points was in 2010, when the post-qualifying framework for social work that had actually been around since the 1990s came into the council, because that provided a really structured mechanism to support and recognise social workers' continuous professional development. We set the standards that our providers are required to meet within the framework, and we are the awarding body for the framework. So an example of how that works, the Probation Board for Northern Ireland collaborated with an academic partner to build a suite of probation practice modules that are aligned to our professional and practice framework and master's level development. And that enables probation officers in Northern Ireland to access professional development opportunities that are professionally accredited and academically accredited. And I was fortunate to have the benefit of earlier iterations of that process. And then more recently, Helen, again, you talked about research. The Department of Health in Northern Ireland in 2013 developed a social work and social care research and evidence strategy, and in 2023 they asked us to take on responsibility for that, and we're in the process of I suppose reviewing and developing the third iteration of that framework. So that kind of continuous evolution, looking out and looking across the systems and learning never really sort of stops as a regulator. Our next slide, please. Our context is different to yours. I appreciate that. We have a register currently of almost 50,000 people, and we work with approximately 500 employers. So those registrants are registered with 500 different employers, and as already been said, probation officers in Northern Ireland are qualified social workers, and therefore feature in that 6,886 social workers that we currently register. Next slide, please. I did want to spend a bit of time talking about our model of regulation. But before I do, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's been a shift in the regulatory paradigm in the UK, as regulators are seeking to upstream regulation, I suppose is the term that's used, which is essentially a model of early intervention and prevention. And that's language that would be very familiar to all of you on the screen. There's a greater emphasis on placed on supporting the professionalism of all registrants while continuing to act against the minority that may pose a risk of harm. So the model of regulation that we have developed in Northern Ireland we describe as dynamic and relational. We have a focus on protecting the public, but through the development of safe, competent social work and social care practitioners. And the three interrelated pillars that you see on the screen of standards, regulation and workforce development combine to support improvement in the quality of social work and social care services delivered to those in need. And I suppose the really important and crucial artery to that is the potential that's unlocked. And this is the scales when the probability of risk and harm is balanced with good and better. So understanding that connection and recognising the need for this balance sits at the heart of effective regulation. And it's how we've been doing our regulation for quite a long time. Our primary legislation was quite permissive, which has allowed us to be more agile in terms of how we developed as a regulator. And the foundation of our approach to regulation is partnership with social workers, social care practitioners, employers, people who use services, education providers and government. And I suppose it's really, and the service regulator as well, which I suppose is our equivalent to the inspector of probation. That allows us to triangulate intelligence and to use our connections to inform and improve quality. Next slide, please. Of course, as a regulator, we also have a fitness to practice function that has also evolved over time. In terms of the threshold of harm that's referred into it, and we have standards of acceptance with employers now, and we also moved to consensual disposals where they were appropriate. Like other regulators, it's a relatively small part of our regulated workforce that come to the attention of fitness to practice, about 1% per year. And next slide, please. I'm rattling through this very quickly. I'm aware that a combination of the speed I'm talking at and my accent might mean that you don't actually understand, but hopefully you're picking up most of it. So in terms of some of the things that we do to support the workforce, in addition to the professional and practice framework that I talked about for social work, we have a whole range of supports that we engage in. We have a podcast series which provides an opportunity for our registrants to contribute to thinking in relation to professional practice, to share their expertise and their research interests. We host the annual Social Work and Social Care Research Conference, lunchtime seminars, and we also have a learning zone. And I know I'm out of time, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Care and Practice Framework that in the last 5 years we've developed to support continuous professional learning for the social care workforce. And on Thursday last week, the framework picked up the Innovation Award at the European Social Services Awards in Madrid. So given that it's very recent, I can't not tell you about that. And I've added a few references on the next slide, which you can view in your own time if anyone's interested in some further reading around our experience. Oh, so I'm going to hand over to Kyle. Apologies, Kyle.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you again for inviting me to contribute to this panel discussion. Everyone, I'm proud to be invited. So for those of you that don't know, I wrote a practitioner response paper in the Probation Journal in the June special edition this year. I responded to Dr. Matt Tidmarsh and Sharon Uchi's article that explored the opportunities and challenges of professional registration. My response reframed Tidmarsh and Uchi's opportunities and challenges and instead reframed these as risks, needs and strengths, which I've used to inform this panel presentation. So next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. As the other speakers have already touched on, the overarching goal of professional registration is to foster a unified organisational identity, boost internal and external confidence in the probation service, and ensure that practitioners are recognised for their competence and commitment. Next slide, please. So what are some of the key risks associated with professional registration? And again, a reminder that I explore these risks in a lot more detail in the written response paper itself. And I believe that will be shared with attendees after. But as a brief overview, I argue that the implementation of the probation professional register presents several risks that could exacerbate existing issues within the probation service. One major concern is the fractured organisational culture that persists following the reunification of services in 2021, and I actually wrote a whole research report about the fractured professional identities that staff within the service have now as part of my Graham Smith Research Award not too long ago. Perhaps that could be shared too. Anyway, the research indicates that there's varying levels of confidence, competence and commitment among different staffing groups, which could hinder the formation of a unified professional identity that the professional register seeks to achieve. Additionally, the shift towards increased accountability through mandatory registration requirements may intensify the prevailing fear culture within the service, and this culture is often heightened, especially during inspections or when serious further offences occur, so leading to increased scrutiny and stress among practitioners. And the demands of annual re-registration, continuous professional development and adherence to professional codes may contribute to burnout, especially among already overworked staff. And senior probation officers in particular face additional burdens as they are responsible for overseeing registration compliance whilst also managing performance and quality. So without adequate support and clear communication of the benefits that registration brings, these pressures could lead to organisational cynicism and further damage the service's culture and retention efforts. Next slide, please. So moving on to some of the opportunities and challenges that I again reframe as needs within the paper. So to ensure the success of the professional register, several critical needs and challenges must be addressed. Firstly, the register must clearly articulate the benefits of professional registration to practitioners to increase that buy-in, including potential improvements in pay and career progression. Without tangible incentives, staff may perceive registration as a burdensome tick box exercise rather than a meaningful professional advancement. And secondly, the service must invest in robust continuous professional development frameworks, ideally in partnership with higher education establishments that go beyond e-learning and provide opportunities for reflective practice and skill enhancement. And I think this commitment, I think this comment around skills is really important. And so conducting a skills gap analysis can help tailor CPD initiatives to individual practitioner needs and thereby increasing engagement and effectiveness. Another challenge is the potential for the register to reinforce a tiered system within the probation service, particularly if probation service officers are excluded from the register, but we've heard that they are soon to be included, which is great. I go on in the paper to express my concern around that this could lead to feelings of inequality and second-class status among PSOs if not addressed. Additionally, there are concerns about the disproportionate impact of registration requirements on ethnic minority staff too, which I think is a valid concern, who already face higher rates of performance and disciplinary actions. And addressing these issues requires careful monitoring and the implementation of anti-discriminatory practices to ensure fairness and inclusivity within the registration process, and ideally some form of independent ethical governance. Next slide, please. And our last section for me, drawing on some of the key points from my response paper again, where I end with a discussion around strengths of professional registration. And so despite the challenges, the Probation Professional Register offers several strengths and opportunities that can positively transform the probation service. And we've heard lots of those already today. It must be celebrated that the establishment of the register is a significant milestone in recognising probation work as a formal profession, enhancing its credibility and value. The service is actively working to strengthen the role of senior probation officers through policy and operational changes, which will support better management oversight and reflective practice supervision. And these efforts are expected to alleviate some of the workload pressures and improve frontline practice. Additionally, the register is exploring ways to formally recognise the contributions of PSOs, as we've already heard, and I think that there's like I say, been further advancement on this in recent times, which will hopefully boost inclusivity and morale. The move towards independent regulation, as announced by Sonia Flynn as well, also signals a commitment to long-term professional development and external validation. And importantly, the internal management of the register means that POs are not required to pay any registration fees. And again, a benefit that certainly supports practitioner engagement. And I think that ultimately the register brings the opportunity to structurally align probation with the ethos of social work, as advocated by recent scholars such as Rob Canton, who wrote a great paper detailing how probation is social work. The register brings about potential realignment with social work, further strengthens the probation service's identity and promotes that person-centred care. And I do think that these opportunities, if communicated effectively and implemented thoughtfully, can enhance practitioner buy-in and contribute to a unified and resilient probation service. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the Probation Professional Register represents a progressive step towards formalising and enhancing the professional status of probation practitioners in England and Wales. While the register has the potential to unify the service's identity and improve practitioner confidence and competence, it also poses significant risks if not implemented with care. To mitigate the risks discussed, the service must clearly communicate the benefits of registration, invest in meaningful CPD, and address issues of inequality and inclusivity. Recognising the contributions of all staff, including PSOs, and ensuring fair and ethical registration processes are essential for fostering a positive organisational culture. The strengths of the register, such as its alignment with social work values and the move towards independent regulation, should be celebrated and leveraged to build practitioner commitment. And ultimately, the success of the Probation Professional Register depends on the service's ability to balance strategic goals with the realities of its practitioners, ensuring that registration is not seen as a burden, but as a valuable and empowering professional milestone. That's it from me. Thank you.